Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and today we're joined by Amanda Tyler, Executive Director of the BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, leading the organization as it upholds the historic Baptist principle of religious liberty, defending the free exercise of religion and protecting against its establishment by government. We're especially excited to talk about Amanda's work in leading Christians Against Christian Nationalism. This is a timely conversation because Texas leaders continue to try to insert religion into public spaces, most notably Texas public schools. I know we have listeners from many different faith traditions who are concerned about Christian nationalism, but as a Christian, I feel it's especially important that we speak out against the efforts of others in our tradition who are distorting our faith. And many of you have been doing great work in standing up against Christian nationalism. The Texas Impact Public School Defenders have been working hard all year to oppose efforts to fund unaccountable chaplains in public schools and are now opposing efforts to inject Bible teachings into the Texas public school curriculum. Grace Bonilla, who was on the podcast a few weeks ago, has a new blog post on the Texas Impact website talking about the work of the public school defenders with a link to sign up to join the effort. I hope you'll check that out, as well as all of the other resources on the website at texasimpact.org. Y'all, now is the time to get plugged in. We have an important election coming up, so I hope you're using the Texas Faith Votes resources on the website. And I hope you'll keep an eye on the calendar or join a Texas Impact team so we can all work together for a better Texas. If you have questions about any of it, please shoot me an email at scott@texasimpact.org. We're happy to help, but you're the ones with the local connections, so we look forward to supporting your efforts and cheering you on. So with that, let's wrap up the intro. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Amanda Tyler. Joining us for today's conversation is one of my favorite humans who we've certainly been spending a lot of time with over the course of the last few weeks, Amanda Tyler, Executive Director of BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Amanda, you have certainly been busy. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Scott. Great to be here.
For those who might not know, hopefully you all know, but we were on a webinar together earlier this week. The BJC is doing some really great work. Before we jump into the talk about Christian nationalism, for those who aren't aware, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the BJC and your work?
Yes, so BJC is an 88-year-old education and advocacy organization. We are headquartered on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and our tagline is faith, freedom for all. So we are a faith-based organization, specifically out of the Baptist movement, and our mission is protecting and defending and advocating for everyone's religious freedom. And in the American context, that means advocating for the separation of church and state as an American original that is good for both. That unless we have a separation between the institutions of church and state, we cannot have religious freedom for all people. And so for most of our history, our advocacy has been focused on the halls of power in Washington, U.S. Supreme Court, Congress, the White House, and other parts of the federal bureaucracy and administration. But over the last several years, our work has really expanded across the country through education and advocacy opportunities, most recently through a campaign that we lead called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And also, just on a personal note, a year ago, I moved with my family from Washington, D.C., back to my native Texas, to Dallas, where I lead the organization from Dallas, but also where I am able to be more directly involved in the work that we're doing here in Texas, including through our North Texas organizing project of Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and what we're here to talk about today through pushing back against an increasing Christian nationalist movement that is really focused on public schools in particular, but in other areas of Texas legislature and government.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Christian nationalism, and I wish you didn't have to move back to Texas I'm glad you're here, but I wish we weren't such a hotbed for this topic. But Christian nationalism is a real threat to Americans' individual and religious freedoms. But the term's thrown around a lot. How do you define Christian nationalism, and where are we seeing it?
Well, I think definitions are so important, so I'm glad that we're starting here. I define Christian nationalism as a political ideology and a cultural framework that tries to merge American and Christian identities. Christian nationalism tells a story that to be a true American, to be fully American, one has to be Christian. And not just any kind of Christian, but a particular kind of Christian that holds certain fundamentalist religious beliefs that are often in line with some conservative political priorities. And this idea of Christian nationalism, this ideology of Christian nationalism, really relies heavily on this mythological history of the United States as being founded as a quote unquote Christian nation, a country not demographically Christian, but rather a country that was founded by Christians in order to privilege Christianity and Christians in law and policy and with political power. And the problem with this mythological history is it's just not true. It relies on a cherry-picked version of American history that ignores the constitutional text, the constitutional framework that keeps government neutral when it comes to religion, neither advancing nor denigrating any particular religion or religion in general. In that, as I referred to it earlier, in an American original of the separation of church and state, that really is a hallmark of religious freedom in this country. Christian nationalism attacks that fundamental idea of religious freedom protected by the separation of church and state.
And so what's it look like in practice?
So Christian nationalism in practice looks like privileging Christianity in law and policy. We see it, I talked about it defined as an ideology and a cultural framework, but it's also a well-funded political movement. In order to see Christian nationalism really advancing as it is right now in American law and politics and just society, you really need both. You need the ideology that tells the story of America as a Christian nation, but you also have people who are in certain places of political power who are really pushing it on. So in context, I want to talk first about, some of the most, I think, egregious examples of Christian nationalism and some of that symbolism, particularly we saw on January 6, 2021 at the insurrection at the Capitol, where you see Christian symbols that are being used to justify political violence and a violent overthrow or attempted overthrow of the lawful election of the presidential election of 2020. So that's like a very graphic example, I think, of Christian nationalism, where you see the symbols of Christianity being used to justify a particular political outcome. But we have much more everyday examples of Christian nationalism, particularly most recently in the public schools. So several years ago, we saw a series of bills in many states, including Texas, that required the posting of "In God We Trust" in public schools. This is an example of Christian nationalism because the bill's authors said that the rationale for requiring the posting of the U.S. motto in all public schools was that this was foundational to understanding what it means to be an American, that we can't be fully American if we don't adhere to this idea of "In God We Trust." And so that's, again, I think just one example of what it looks like to really merge these identities of American and Christian into one.
Texas Impact, as you know, is an interfaith organization. And so when we've had these conversations, we've certainly heard a lot from our non-Christian members about the importance of standing up against Christian nationalism. But you all, in forming Christians Against Christian Nationalism, kind of very intentionally, I feel like anyway, called Christians to action. Why do you think it's especially important that Christians speak out against Christian nationalism?
Well, for several reasons. I mean, first, Christians have been, and particularly white Christians, have in many ways benefited the most from this ideology of Christian nationalism. It has given us certain cultural privileges that are not afforded to everyone else. And so those of us who have benefited, whether we've wanted to or not, from this ideology of Christian nationalism, I believe bear the greatest responsibility in working to dismantle it. It also is really on Christians to explain why Christian nationalism is not the same as Christianity. To a casual observer, because Christian nationalism uses all of the symbols and language of Christianity, it looks like a lot like Christianity. But those of us who are Christians understand that Christian nationalism is a gross distortion of the teachings of Jesus. It takes the central message of Christianity, which is this gospel of love, and turns it into a false idol of power. And Christians have the information and I think the authenticity to explain that in really clear terms. Just like I, as a Christian, do not feel comfortable in calling out other kinds of religious nationalism that are not associated with my faith. I know, I just can intuit that, to be a Muslim nationalist is not the same as being a Muslim, or to be a Jewish nationalist is not the same as being Jewish, but I can't explain it with the same kind of authority and authenticity as I can when it comes to Christian nationalism. And when we started the campaign of Christians Against Christian Nationalism now 5 years ago, it was our interfaith allies who told us, you really should call this campaign Christians Against Christian Nationalism, because it is on you, Christians. You have done the most to perpetuate this ideology. You've benefited from it. Really is on you to do the heavy lifting of dismantling it. And they told us with remarkable candor and vulnerability that they simply did not feel safe in our society in calling out Christian nationalism with the kind of force that it needs to be called out. And so we really took our interfaith friends' words as a mandate and a charge to do the work of Christians Against Christian Nationalism.
Yeah, I love that answer, and I really do feel that challenge as a Christian, and we'll throw that challenge out to Christians and Christian leaders to say, loudly, you do not speak for us. This does not represent our faith, and there is an opportunity coming soon for folks to do that here in the great state of Texas. I mentioned in the open of this conversation, we were together on a webinar last week, talking specifically about the proposed Texas public school curriculum, which includes many references to Christianity, many references to Bible stories, and much more. Talk to us about your concerns about that proposed curriculum.
Yeah, so I think it's important to start by saying we don't have concerns in general about talking about Christianity or other faiths in the public school. Now, when it comes to the actual exercise of religion in public schools, both public school students and teachers and administrators, they are able to continue to exercise their religion in public schools in ways that are appropriate to the setting. But that's not what we're talking about with this curriculum. This curriculum is actually it's something that is being put forward by the state that would be mandated if it's passed, and then if school districts adopt it, to actually be what is taught in schools. And for more than 60 years now, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that we can teach about religion in objective ways, but we cannot teach religion in any kind of devotional way. We cannot teach religion as fact in the public schools. That is simply not the role of public schools. That is the role of religious organizations, of families. And that is a protection for everyone's religious freedom. And students and families need to feel free to go to public school or to send their children to public school without worrying that the state is going to interfere with their religious choices about how to teach religion or if to teach religion at all. And so in looking at this massive curriculum, we see so many instances of not just talking about Christianity, but actually teaching Bible stories to children as young as kindergarten. And we see a lot of gratuitous references, not just references to scripture, but actual places in the teaching guide where the teachers are instructed to tell Bible stories. And the way that it's related, it is teaching them almost like fact statements, not with the kind of critical eye that one would expect in an objective teaching of religion. And these are also not done in the context of teaching about world religions or even teaching about history. These are reading and language arts class lessons. And so that basically this curriculum has infused the teaching of Bible into teaching children how to read. We could be reading all different kinds of stories and all different kinds of texts, but they have chosen in throughout this curriculum to actually teach readings from the Bible. And I find this to be a really troubling example of really trying to push religion onto children in the public schools in ways that interfere with these children and their families, their rights to religious freedom.
Do you have one of those that an example of one of those that might have been particularly troubling?
Well, one example, I think, we also have to think about age appropriateness. And so, as I mentioned, this curriculum really goes from K to 5, but you have a lesson that is teaching kindergartners. And they're actually, again, teaching them to read and teaching them just the sequence of stories. First, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And, as one might expect for kindergartners, they teach using, fairy tales. And so one of them was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And so they're teaching Goldilocks and Three Bears, but then they decide to have this morality lesson in the middle of it. And they're teaching the golden rule, that this idea that is really universal to human experience that is found in a number of different religions, that you treat others like you would want to be treated. But instead of using language that these children might be more familiar with, they use language right out of the Gospel of Matthew. And they have them teach the saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then the lesson specifically references the Sermon on the Mount from the Bible and talks about what a sermon is and what a mount is. These are just examples that I'm showing are just entirely gratuitous references to the Bible, to teaching particular scriptures, and then sending a message to children that this idea of morality is unique to Christianity, that this idea of the golden rule came directly from the mouth of Jesus, and that we have it in scripture, in the Christian scripture, in a way that is not only inaccurate, because this message is found in a number of different religious texts, but also it furthers this idea that one has to be a Christian in order to be moral. And in the context of a public school in the United States, that one has to be Christian in order to be an American. And that is that message of Christian nationalism that is kind of implicit in this curriculum and being taught to children as young as 5 years old.
I love that example, and that's certainly one that our public school defenders have talked about while they've been doing their homework. But besides the obvious problems related to separation of church and state, are there other problems with curriculum that's infused with religion?
And I think particularly for this age group, that when it's being taught by this authority figure in your life, your elementary school teacher, that it's really hard for kids to discern what is being taught as a story versus what is being taught as objective fact. And this is true not just for kindergartners, but for kids in this entire age group. And so I'll give you another example. There is a lesson for fifth graders where they're learning about Renaissance art and culture. And of course, one of the master paintings from that particular era was The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. And so in teaching about that painting, again, the curriculum goes a step further and starts talking about the Bible story from Matthew about the Last Supper in particular. And, I'll just read directly from the reader on this. It says, in the biblical narrative, Jesus gave his disciples hints that he would die. Jesus did not leave his disciples without hope, though. He also foreshadowed his resurrection when he was raised from the dead. At the dinner, Jesus goes on to describe how participation in this Last Supper would symbolize his sacrificial death and how his followers could honor his sacrifice in the future. So just the way it is written as if this is a historical account. And as opposed to a religious text that is found in a book of the Bible that is interpreted in many different ways by many different faiths, and importantly, is not shared by everyone who is in that public school classroom. And so this kind of teaching, this way of teaching story as historical fact to audiences that have a difficult time discerning the difference between the two, interferes with the family's choice about how they will instruct their children when it comes to religion. I mean, to be clear, as a Christian, this is a central part of our faith tradition, of my faith tradition. I know of your faith tradition, Scott. It is a story and a narrative that I hold dear. And I hold it so dear that I don't want the public schools teaching it to our kids. It is something that is given instead to churches, to religious leaders, to families to impart these stories and to help children help answer their very difficult and often astute theological questions that come with it. I mean, imagine teaching this in a public school classroom to fifth graders. They will have questions about these that the teachers are not equipped to answer, and it's not their role, and it's distracting to what they're there to be learning about in the first place.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that since we've been having this conversation, right? Certainly there are students who are not from a Christian background, but even those of us within the Christian community, I'm a United Methodist. We argue all the time about theology and interpretation and all of those things. And I've certainly had conversations with my churches over the years about Sunday school curriculum for kids. So if we're having those conversations within our own faith traditions, I can't imagine a teacher trying to figure out how to answer questions that will inevitably come from these texts in a way that parents and churches and students and everybody else will feel good about. They're not trained to do it. And so, these should be conversations that parents and Sunday school teachers and pastors and youth leaders and everybody else should be having, not public school teachers. I can't imagine how hard that would be for them. All that said, is this a Texas-specific phenomenon, or is there a coordinated effort that's taking place throughout the country to try to infuse this Christian nationalism into our schools and other institutions?
Well, while I haven't seen this exact tactic taken in other states, we definitely have examples from other states, including our neighbor to the north in Oklahoma, really trying to push the teaching of Bible into public school curriculum. The superintendent of schools in Oklahoma recently issued an edict that we would be teaching the Bible in that state in grades K through 12, and that he would be supplying every public school classroom with a Bible in order to do that kind of teaching, which is just ludicrous when you think about all of the different translations and interpretations of the Bible, and how you could just take a biblical text and apply it to any lesson that you're teaching in the public schools. And in his edict, he really did explicitly link in language that is reminiscent of Christian nationalism, the idea that one can't understand the United States or can't understand our Constitution, in his words, without understanding the Bible. These statements are totally unfounded in the constitutional history and text. I mean, just a quick reminder, nowhere in the U.S. Constitution is God or Christianity mentioned, and the only place in the original Constitution that religion is mentioned is to ban religious tests for public office. So the U.S. Constitution is a secular document with a secular founding that is not required to have the Bible to understand the U.S. Constitution. So we're seeing that happen in Oklahoma. In the state of Florida, we are seeing incentives for teachers to go to special training that has been formulated by Hillsdale College that really trains teachers to teach civics and U.S. government in a different way without reference to the separation of church and state or to the First Amendment's protections for religious freedom in ways that tell a cherry-picked history of the U.S. as a Christian nation that furthers this ideology of Christian nationalism and really undermines the understanding of religious freedom for all people. So I think it's important that we understand what's happening in Texas within this larger context, and also know that depending on what happens here in Texas, we could see repercussions in other states. If this curriculum goes forward as passed and is implemented, I think we could see other states try to do the same thing. On the other hand, if this curriculum runs into problems, if there is great public outcry over what the state's trying to do, we might see not only success in Texas in not having this curriculum implemented, but also other states think twice before they introduce this divisive idea into their educational systems.
We definitely have a chance to make a statement over the coming months that Texas isn't going to stand for this. And so let's talk about what folks can do to help make that possible. We're going to go short-term, long-term here. Short-term, what do you hope folks will do over the course of the coming weeks in relation to both the curriculum and anything else related to Christian nationalism here in Texas?
Well, I'm glad that they're listening to this program to become more educated about what's going on with this curriculum, but they should also be following news accounts. The Texas Tribune in particular has been doing great reporting on what's happening with regard to this curriculum. Coming up on September 10th is the beginning of several days of hearings and hearing of public testimony with concerns about this curriculum. And so would encourage people to both read the curriculum, but also sign up to testify or come and show signs of support that day about your concerns about the curriculum. There is also a public comment period that's coming to a close on August 16th. So if you haven't submitted comments yet, it might be difficult to meet that particular deadline, but you still can reach out to your representative on the State Board of Education by just emailing them a letter with your concerns about the curriculum. I think the more people that they hear from their constituents explaining why, from whatever perspective they have, whether they're Christian, whether they're a member of another faith community, whether they're not religious, just whatever concerns they have about this curriculum, I think it's really important that they make their voice known. Now, in November is when the State Board of Education will actually take a vote on what to do with this curriculum, whether to adopt it, amend it, reject it. Depending on what happens there, we'll then see perhaps some additional advocacy opportunities at the level of the school board. Just because the state adopts this curriculum does not mean it immediately goes into effect. And so if there are still objectionable parts to this curriculum after the November vote, then it will be up to everyone to go to their local school board and ask their school board to pick a different curriculum, to express their concerns about this one, and to urge them not to teach a curriculum that teaches Bible stories as fact to kids in elementary school.
So I'm sure everybody listening is currently looking up who their State Board of Education member is and finding that contact information. B was on the program last week talking about the importance of building relationships with legislators over the course of the coming months as we prepare for the next legislative session. If they're having those meetings with their current representatives or candidates for office, should they be having conversations about this as well?
I think so. So just this week, there was an early hearing with legislators. We're talking about education savings accounts, but Representative James Tallarico also brought up in that conversation his concerns with this curriculum. And so I think this is something that legislators are aware of. I think it's important for people to express their concerns over this curriculum. It's unclear to me whether there is a role or not for the Texas legislature to play next session when it comes to this curriculum. But even if not, I do think we will see other legislative efforts to push religious exercise or the teaching of religion. Again, not teaching about religion, but actually teaching religion in public schools. And so making your concerns known about this curriculum to your legislators, I think, is also a very effective way to advocate for religious freedom.
Love it. And everybody should watch that Representative Tallarico exchange from that hearing. Texas Impact has it on our YouTube channel, our Ledge TV channel, so make sure you check that out. So that's short term. Anything else you can think of that folks should be looking at long term in terms of combating Christian nationalism?
Well, I think we can expect to see some of these other bad ideas we've seen in other states come back to the legislature. So our neighbor to the east, Louisiana, they passed a first of its kind bill in the modern era to require the posting of the Ten Commandments in public schools. I think we can fully expect to see that effort come back to the Texas legislature next year. This is all part of a larger goal of really privatizing religion. This is all part of a larger goal of privatizing education. So bringing religion into public schools, but also underfunding public schools in order to fund private religious schools. And so I think all of this, we need to think about as a larger web of really upsetting the balance and the separation of church and state in ways that undermine everyone's religious freedom and also undermine public education generally. And so would really encourage people to be actively involved, again, stay informed about what's going on, make relationships and contacts with your elected officials, not just at the legislature, but also with your local officials, your state board of education representative, but also your school board representatives, so that you are able to be an effective advocate when the time comes.
Love all of that. Amanda, thank you so much for the time today and for the work you're doing leading on this issue. You have so many great resources out there. I want to give you a chance for shameless plugs, but everyone should be following the BJC, Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Love the work y'all are doing in North Texas as part of that organizing project. Give us your shameless plugs. What do you hope folks will do, or offer any closing thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, so please follow BJC at BJC on the Hill. You can find Christians Against Christian Nationalism at End Christian Nationalism. We're on TikTok and on Instagram. I have a new book coming out October 22nd called How to End Christian Nationalism, which is available for pre-order now. And I also co-host a podcast. We're on hiatus right now, but we'll be coming back soon. It's called Respecting Religion, and you can catch up on our first 5 seasons of Respecting Religion wherever you listen to podcasts.
Love all of that. Friends, we'll have to have a book club coming soon. Amanda, thank you so much for the time and the work you're doing every day. We appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for the strong partnership.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Amanda. Y'all, I can't say it enough, but when people of faith from other perspectives try to insert religion into the public sphere, it's especially important to Texans of faith who believe in religious liberty to stand up and say that they don't speak for us. Our faith traditions call us to engage and work for justice and equity for all people, to care for our neighbors and communities. Now is the moment to act. If not now, when? I hope you'll consider what you can do in the work for justice. As always, Texas Impact has tools for you. I especially hope everyone is using the Texas Faith Votes resources. You can find those and so much more at texasimpact.org. While you're there, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. If you have questions about any of it, please reach out. You can reach me at scott@texasimpact.org. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnan, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.